The thing about trouble is, it rarely announces itself with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the smallest, pettiest ways. And in Derek Johnson's case, it came in the form of a white Lexus SUV parked across his driveway. At first glance, you'd think it was nothing. Just a car sitting in a quiet suburban neighborhood, lined with oak trees and neatly cut lawns. The kind of street where the loudest sound most days was kids riding scooters or a lawnmower humming in the distance. But this wasn't just a car. It was a blockade. Because that driveway, that was his, the house he'd worked his whole life to afford. The home he was raising his 2 kids in. The little piece of land where he grilled steaks on weekends and waved to passing neighbors. His sanctuary. And now, someone was using it like their personal parking lot. Derek stood at the edge of the curb, gym bag still slung over his shoulder from work, his shirt collar damp from the sticky Atlanta humidity. He felt his jaw tighten as his eyes narrowed on the Lexus. Clean, polished, not a speck of dirt on it, like it had just rolled out of a dealership commercial. And it wasn't the first time. This was the 3rd time in 7 days that he'd come home to find it sitting there. The first time, he'd shrugged it off. Mistakes happen. Maybe a visitor didn't realize it wasn't public parking. The second time, he'd been irritated, but still gave the benefit of the doubt. But by the third, no, this wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. And that's when Derek noticed her, standing across the street, right on her porch, holding a phone like it was an accessory more than a device. Susan Miller. The neighborhood called her the Ho Queen. Others, less kindly, just called her Karen. She lived directly across from Derek's 2-story brick home. Early 50s, always in some kind of athleisure outfit, though no one ever saw her jog a single step. Hair perfectly dyed blonde, cut in a sharp bob that looked like she got it touched up every other week. And right now, she was watching him. Not openly, not enough to be called out. Just that sideways glance. The kind that said, "Yeah, I did this. What are you gonna do about it?" Derek took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. 12 hours in the office, traffic on the interstate, and now this. He walked across the grass strip, stopping in front of the Lexus. He glanced through the tinted windows. Empty, keys gone, doors locked. And across the street, Susan pretended to scroll on her phone. Derek called out, raising his voice just enough to carry. "Hey, Susan, is this your car?" Her head snapped up with that fake, sugary smile she always put on at home meetings. "Oh, that? Yeah, it's mine." Derek frowned. "And it's in my driveway?" She tilted her head like she was the reasonable one here. "Well, my husband's reorganizing the garage. I just needed somewhere to put it temporarily. I figured you weren't using your driveway right now." The casual way she said it made Derek's blood heat. Not using it? His own driveway? He forced his voice calm. "Yeah, but that's not how this works. I need you to move it." Her fake smile slipped into a smirk. "Derek, you really ought to be more neighborly. It's not a big deal. You don't want to cause unnecessary tension with the whole over something this small, do you?" The way she said neighborly. The way she tossed in the hoe like it was a weapon she controlled. Like she was reminding him who pulled the strings in this subdivision. Derek felt his hands twitch at his sides. Every instinct screamed to snap back, but instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed record. She held it steady, pointing right at her. Her smirk faltered. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "Documenting," Derek replied evenly. "So if this happens again, I'll have proof. Won't be my word against yours." For the first time, she looked rattled. She turned back toward her door without answering, muttering something under her breath. That night, Derek sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the short clip he'd recorded. His wife, Tasha, leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "She's testing you," Tasha said flatly. Derek sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Yeah, and I've been letting it slide. But blocking my driveway? That's different. That's disrespect." Their daughter, Maya, only 12, peeked her head in from the living room. "Daddy, Why was Miss Susan's car in our driveway again? Derek forced a smile. He didn't want her worried. Don't worry about it, baby girl. Daddy's gonna handle it. But in his chest, the words burned. Handle it? How? How do you handle someone who uses rules and power to harass you while hiding behind the hoe? The next morning, the cicadas were buzzing, the Georgia sun already blazing. Derek grabbed his coffee and headed out the front door for work. And there she was again. Susan, sitting on her porch, sipping her own mug, watching him like she owned the street. For a split second, he wondered if this was really about parking, or if it was about him, who he was, what he represented. He shook it off, climbed into his car, and drove away. But all day, at work, the question gnawed at him. When he turned into his neighborhood that evening, tired from back-to-back meetings, his heart dropped. Because there it was, the Lexus, parked in his driveway again. Not just parked, angled. Like Susan wanted to make sure he couldn't pull in, couldn't even squeeze his car alongside. Derek's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. His pulse thundered in his ears. This wasn't just inconvenience anymore. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. A message. He pulled up slowly, headlights washing over the shiny white paint. He sat there, engine idling, gripping the wheel so tightly his hands hurt. Across the street, a curtain twitched in Susan's window. She was watching, waiting. Derek inhaled sharply, chest rising and falling. He thought of his kids inside, thought of Tasha, thought of the years of mortgage payments, the pride he took in providing for them. And in that moment, he made a decision. If Susan wanted to play games, then fine. But this was his driveway, his home, and he was about to remind her of that fact. Derek didn't grow up with much. His earliest memories were of a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Southwest Atlanta, the kind where you could hear every argument through the thin walls and smell fried chicken from 3 doors down. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide. His father drove trucks, and Derek learned young that nothing was ever handed to you. You earned it, you protected it, and you respected it. By the time he was 16, Derek was already fixing neighbors' computers for side money, saving every dollar he could. Through scholarships, loans, and pure determination, he made it to Georgia Tech, then landed a job in It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, solid. And after years of grinding, he finally got what he wanted most, a home. Not just any home, his own house. He'd put 20% down on that 2-story brick colonial in Crestwood Oaks, a quiet, tree-lined subdivision just outside Atlanta. The kind of place he'd once ridden his bike through as a kid, dreaming of one day living there. The kind of place where neighbors waved, kids rode scooters, and every lawn looked like it belonged on a postcard. So yeah, when Susan Miller parked her Lexus in his driveway, it wasn't just about space. It wasn't just about inconvenience. It was about everything he'd worked for. From the very beginning, Derek had felt Susan's eyes on him. The first HOA meeting he attended, he showed up in a crisp button-down, folder of notes in hand, eager to introduce himself. He remembered walking in, smiling, and saying, "Hey everyone, I'm Derek Johnson. My family just moved into 214 Maplewood. Glad to be here." Most neighbors smiled back. Some clapped politely. But Susan? She tilted her head, lips curving into that fake smile, and said, "Oh, you're the new homeowner. Welcome. I just hope you're ready to follow the rules. We take things very seriously around here." It was the way she emphasized "your," like she was already assuming he didn't belong. From then on, the digs kept coming. "You probably don't know how we do landscaping in this neighborhood. Garbage cans need to be pulled in immediately. Not sure if that's common where you're from. Oh, that basketball hoop in your driveway might not fit our aesthetic standards." Always coated in that polite, artificial sugar. Derek let it slide. He told himself she was just one of those hoe types who lived for rules and power trips. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about rules. It was about control, about reminding him who she thought this neighborhood belonged to. Now, standing in front of her Lexus for the third time, Derek decided enough was enough. He parked his car on the street, got out, and walked right up to the SUV. He pulled out his phone again, recording as he circled it. License plate, make, model, the angle it blocked his drive. And then he crossed the street. Susan was already stepping out onto her porch, arms folded, like she'd been waiting. "Evening, Derek," she said coolly. "Problem?" "Yeah," Derek shot back. "There's a car in my driveway." "Again." "Yours." Susan shrugged, as if the matter were beneath her. "Well, like I told you before, it's temporary. My husband is." "Stop." Derek cut in, his voice sharper than he intended. "Temporary was once, twice, but 3 times in 1 week? That's not temporary. That's disrespect." Her eyebrows arched. "Disrespect? Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. It's just a driveway." "It's my driveway," Derek snapped. He felt his pulse thundering, his voice rising before he could stop it. "I work for this house. I pay for this driveway. You don't get to decide when I can or can't use it." The fake smile slipped from Susan's face, replaced with something colder. "You might want to watch your tone," she said, voice dropping. "I don't think the whole board would appreciate hostility. And you know I have some influence there." Derek stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "You're threatening me? Over your car blocking my property?" "I'm just saying," Susan replied, straightening her shoulders. "Neighbors who get along tend to have an easier time here. Neighbors who don't, well, let's just say rules can be enforced very strictly." Derek shook his head, disbelief written across his face. "This isn't about neighbors getting along. This is about you thinking you own this street. You don't. Not my house. Not my driveway. Not me." Susan's eyes narrowed. "You should be careful, Derek. People notice things. The condition of your lawn. The noise level when your family has company. Little things that don't look good in the minutes." And there it was. The veiled threat. The coded language. Derek clenched his fists at his sides, breathing hard. He wanted to unleash every ounce of anger building inside him. But instead, he forced his voice low, calm, steady. "Move your car now." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the humid air. Crickets chirped. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Then Susan huffed, pulled out her keys, and clicked the unlock button. The Lexus beeped. She strutted across the street, slid behind the wheel, and reversed out of Derek's driveway with exaggerated slowness, like she was doing him a favor. As she passed him, window down, she muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "You won't last long here." That night, Derek replayed the confrontation in his head over and over. He could still hear her smug tone, still see that smirk. Tasha rubbed his shoulders as he sat at the table, staring blankly at the grain of the wood. "She's not gonna stop," Derek muttered. "This is just the beginning." "You're right," Tasha said softly. "But you're not alone. You've got me. You've got the kids. And maybe, just maybe, you've got more neighbors on your side than you realize." Derek looked up at her, uncertain. Because in neighborhoods like this, people often stayed quiet. They saw, they whispered, but they didn't act. And that's what worried him. Because Susan wasn't just one person. She had power. She had the hope. She had the confidence of someone who thought she couldn't lose. And Derek? He was one man, one family, standing against her. The next morning, as Derek left for work, he noticed something chilling. A folded piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. He plucked it free, unfolded it, and read the words in block letters. Ho noticed possible violation. Unauthorized basketball hoop and driveway. Immediate removal required. Derek froze, heat flooding his face. The hoop. It had been there since the day they moved in. His kids played on it every weekend. And now, suddenly, it was a violation? He looked up. Across the street, Susan stood on her porch again, sipping her coffee, watching, smirking. The letter about the basketball hoop sat on Derek's kitchen counter like a curse. He read it once, twice, a third time. Each line felt like a slap. Oh, notice. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply may result in fines up to $250 per violation. The hoop wasn't new. It wasn't broken. It wasn't blocking traffic. It was the same portable hoop his kids played on since they'd moved in. Every kid on the block had come over at some point to shoot around. It was harmless. But now, suddenly, it was a problem. And Derek knew exactly why. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the street glowed in a warm orange haze, Derek stood at the curb, arms crossed, staring at the hoop. Maya bounced a basketball on the driveway, sneakers squeaking, laughter bubbling from her chest. "Wanna play, Daddy?" she called, dribbling and faking a crossover. For a second, Derek's heart lightened. He smiled, jogged over, and tried to steal the ball. Maya giggled, spun away, and banked a shot off the backboard. But when the ball swished through the net, Derek's eyes lifted across the street. And there was Susan, watching again, phone in hand, recording. The following week, Derek received not one, but 3 more violation notices. Grass length slightly over regulation. Garbage cans visible from the street longer than 24 hours. Unapproved decorative lights around the porch. Each notice came with a threat of fines. Each one was nitpicky, trivial, the kind of thing no other neighbor seemed to be punished for. And every time Derek walked outside, Susan was there, smiling, pretending to be polite. Until one evening, at the monthly HOA meeting, the community center was packed. The smell of coffee and old carpet thick in the air. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors chattering in low voices. Derek sat near the back, jaw tight, Tasha gripping his hand. At the front, Susan took her seat at the table of board members, shuffling papers like she was the mayor. "Order, please," she said sweetly, tapping the microphone. "We have several violations to discuss tonight, including some ongoing issues at 214 Maplewood." All eyes turned. Derek felt his chest tighten. Susan smiled. "It seems Mr. Johnson has had repeated infractions, including an unauthorized basketball hoop and visible garbage cans. The board will have to decide whether fines should be issued." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some neighbors glanced at Derek with sympathy, others with judgment. Derek stood, heart pounding. "With all due respect, this is harassment. That hoop has been there since the day I moved in. The cans. Everyone leaves them out overnight sometimes. Why am I the only one being targeted?" Susan's lips curled into that tight, condescending grin. "Rules are rules, Mr. Johnson. If you feel singled out, perhaps it's because you're drawing unnecessary attention to yourself." The way she said it, calm, patronizing, dripping with coded venom, made Derek's skin crawl. Another board member, Mr. Andrews, cleared his throat. "Let's not escalate. We'll table the fines until next month. But Mr. Johnson, please bring your property into compliance." Derek sat, heat burning through him. Tasha squeezed his hand, whispering, "Stay calm." But he could feel Susan's eyes on him, triumphant. This wasn't just about basketball hoops or garbage cans. This was about breaking him. A few days later, it got worse. Derek was pulling into the neighborhood when flashing lights caught his eye. A police cruiser idled near his driveway. An officer stood by the Lexus, the same Lexus, parked in his driveway again. Derek's stomach dropped. He parked on the street, stormed up, and demanded, "Why is her car here again?" The officer glanced at him, then at Susan, who was standing on her porch, arms crossed, feigning concern. "She called us," the officer said flatly. "Said you were harassing her over a parking dispute." Derek's mouth fell open. "She's harassing me. That's my driveway she keeps blocking." Susan piped up from across the street, her voice high and innocent. "Officer, I told you, I only parked there because my driveway was full. And every time, he comes out yelling, threatening me. I just don't feel safe." "Safe?" Derek barked, stunned. "I've never threatened you. I asked you to move your car off my property." The officer held up a hand. "Sir, calm down. I'm not issuing any citations tonight. Just maybe work it out civilly. It's a neighborhood issue, not a police one. Derek stared at him in disbelief. So she can keep blocking my driveway, but if I say something, I'm the problem? The officer avoided his eyes, muttered something about being short-staffed, and got back in his cruiser. Seconds later, the taillights faded down the block, leaving Derek standing in the street, fuming. And Susan? She gave him one last smile before slipping back inside her house. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above him. I'm losing this, he whispered into the dark. She's turning the rules, the board, even the cops against me. Tasha rolled over, placing a hand on his chest. You're not losing. You just haven't decided how far you're willing to go yet. Her words stuck in his mind. How far was he willing to go? How much would he tolerate before pushing back? Not with patience, not with polite words, but with action. The following morning brought the answer. Derek stepped outside, coffee mug in hand. The air was thick with humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees. He glanced across the street. Susan's Lexus was gone. For once, her driveway was clear. Relief fluttered in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But when he reached his mailbox, he saw another envelope, the whole seal stamped in red. He tore it open and froze. Notice of hearing, possible suspension of homeowner privileges. It accused him of ongoing hostility toward the HOA, of creating disturbances at meetings, and of failing to comply with community guidelines. If the board voted against him, his access to the community pool, gym, and clubhouse would be revoked. Fines could escalate. Even liens on his property were possible. Derek's hand trembled as he lowered the letter. This wasn't petty anymore. This was war. The letter sat on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. Derek had read it 5 times, each word drilling deeper into his skull. Suspension of homeowner privileges. Failure to comply may result in escalating fines. Further noncompliance could lead to liens. It wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. Susan had taken the petty parking games and twisted them into a whole crusade designed to squeeze him, bleed him, break him down until he either submitted or left. And for the first time in weeks, Derek felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just angry. He was done. That night, he sat in the garage, the smell of oil and cut grass thick in the air, laptop glowing on the workbench. He clicked through the whole bylaws, eyes scanning each line. Buried in the legal jargon, he found something interesting. Homeowners may petition for a special meeting if 20% of residents sign in support. Another clause. Repeated parking violations may result in towing at the homeowner's expense, regardless of offender's status in the community. Derek leaned back, heart pounding. So the rules weren't just weapons for Susan. They could be weapons for him too. The next day, Derek started knocking on doors. It wasn't easy. Some neighbors cracked their doors cautiously. Others gave polite smiles, and a few didn't answer at all. But slowly, a pattern emerged. When Derek explained what had been happening, Susan's Lexus blocking his driveway, the sudden flood of violation letters, the police call, neighbors leaned in, eyes wide. She's been on me about my shutters for months, one woman whispered. She fined me for leaving a Halloween decoration up too long. Another said bitterly. She thinks she runs the place. By the end of the week, Derek had a stack of signatures, more than 20%, enough to call a special meeting. For the first time since the war began, he felt momentum shifting. But he wasn't done, because Susan wasn't just a busybody. She was arrogant. She believed she could bend the rules without consequences, and Derek was ready to prove otherwise. The opportunity came 2 days later. Derek pulled into the neighborhood, sun dipping low, headlights washing across his driveway. And there it was again, the Lexus, parked bold as ever, nose tilted across his property like it belonged there. His hands clenched the steering wheel. His chest heaved. But instead of marching across the street to argue, Derek smiled. Because this time, he was ready. He parked his car on the street, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he'd looked up the night before. City Towing. How can we help you? A gruff voice answered. Yeah, Derek said, keeping his tone calm but firm. Got a car illegally parked in my driveway, blocking me from getting in. White Lexus SUV. Want it gone. Address? 214 Maplewood. On the way. Minutes later, the rumble of a tow truck echoed down the street. Neighbors peeked through blinds, curious. The truck's orange lights flashed as it pulled up beside the Lexus. The driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. This the car? Yep, Derek said, pointing. Not mine. Been parked here without permission. The driver shrugged. No problem. Chains rattled, metal clanged, and slowly, the Lexus lifted off the ground. And that's when the front door across the street flew open. Susan stormed out, hair wild, face red, voice shrill. What do you think you're doing? That's my car. Derek folded his arms, calm as stone. Yeah, and it's parked in my driveway. Tow company's just doing their job. You can't do this, she screeched, marching across the street in her slippers. This is harassment. I'll call the police again. The tow driver looked up from securing the chains. Ma'am, it's his property. If he says you're not allowed, you're not allowed. Call the cops if you want, but they won't stop us. Susan spun on Derek, fury blazing in her eyes. You're going to regret this, she spat. You think the hoe will let this slide? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Derek leaned in slightly, voice low and steady. No, Susan. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The tow truck roared, lifting the Lexus onto its flatbed. With a final jolt, it clamped into place. Susan screamed, actually screamed, as the truck rumbled down the street, her Lexus disappearing into the night. Neighbors stood on porches now, some gasping, some hiding smiles behind their hands. And Derek, for the first time in weeks, he felt something sweet. Victory. But the war was far from over. 2 days later, Derek returned home from work to find a certified letter taped to his door. He ripped it open and scanned the words, his pulse spiking. Notice of emergency HOA board meeting concerning aggressive conduct by homeowner Derek Johnson. At the bottom, the signature burned into his vision. Susan Miller, HOA president. That night, Derek sat with Tasha at the kitchen table, letter between them. She's coming for you harder now, Tasha said, worry in her voice. Good, Derek muttered, leaning back in his chair. Let her, because this time, I've got proof. I've got signatures, and I've got the law on my side. But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt gnawed at him. Susan wasn't just vengeful. She was clever. She knew how to twist stories, how to spin lies until people believed them. And at that emergency meeting, she'd make sure the whole neighborhood saw Derek not as a victim, but as the aggressor. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday at 7 p.m. By Wednesday, the entire neighborhood knew. People whispered about it on sidewalks. Kids overheard their parents talking at dinner tables. And by the time Derek got home each night, he could feel the eyes on him. Curious eyes, judgmental eyes, some supportive, some skeptical. And across the street, Susan made sure to fuel the fire. She stood on her porch every evening, glass of wine in hand, talking to whichever neighbor passed by. Her voice carried, loud enough for Derek to catch snippets. Harassment, tow truck, in front of everyone, unsafe environment for families. She was painting herself as the victim, and Derek knew it. On Thursday night, Derek invited a few trusted neighbors into his living room. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence as they gathered. Mr. Davis from 2 doors down, the Carters from the corner, even Mrs. Jenkins, the retired teacher who'd lived there longer than anyone. They sat on the couch and folding chairs, nodding as Derek laid out the letters, the violation notices, and finally, the petition he'd collected. She's trying to bury me under fines and lies, Derek said, his voice steady but tight. But this petition proves I'm not the only one tired of her games. 27 signatures. That's more than enough to call for a vote on her position. Mr. Davis leaned forward, glasses slipping down his nose. Son, you've got support. Folks are sick of her, but you've got to be careful. She knows the rules better than anyone, and she's ruthless. She'll spin that toe into a crime if she can. Mrs. Jenkins clucked her tongue. That woman's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. I say it's about time someone stood up to her. You got my vote. The Carters exchanged a look before Mr. Carter spoke. She's got friends on the board. Andrews, for one. If she's got him backing her, she might control the outcome. Derek nodded slowly. Then I need more than anger. I need facts, receipts, video. If she wants to play official, I'll be official. That night, after everyone left, Derek stayed up until past midnight. His laptop glowed in the dim room, coffee gone cold beside him. He uploaded clips from his phone. Susan admitting the Lexus was hers. Susan brushing off his request to move it. Susan smirking on her porch as if daring him to act. He organized every HOA violation letter into a neat folder. He highlighted inconsistencies in the bylaws. He printed copies of the petition. Piece by piece, he built his defense. And somewhere deep in his chest, he felt the faint stir of confidence. This time, when Susan came swinging, he wouldn't just block. He'd strike back. Friday arrived heavy with tension. The air was thick and muggy, cicadas droning in the trees. By late afternoon, cars were already lining the street outside the community center. Families dressed in their neat suburban vests filed inside, voices low, anticipation buzzing. Derek buttoned a crisp shirt, Tasha smoothing the collar as she looked him in the eyes. You ready? As I'll ever be, he said, exhaling slowly. You've got this, she whispered, kissing his cheek. Maya peeked in from the hallway. Daddy, are they really gonna take our house? Derek knelt, pulling her into a hug. No, baby. No one's taking our house. Not while I'm here. Her small arms squeezed him tight before she let go. And with that, Derek grabbed his folder of evidence and walked out the door. The community center buzzed like a hive. Folding chairs scraped across the floor, neighbors clustering in groups. Some nodded to Derek as he entered. Others avoided his eyes. At the front of the room, Susan sat like a queen at her throne, flanked by two board members. She wore a navy blazer tonight, hair perfectly styled, smile polite but sharp. When Derek entered, her eyes lit with cold satisfaction. Well, she said loudly enough for the room to hear. Let's get this circus started. Laughter rippled from a few of her allies. Derek ignored it, taking a seat near the front. He placed his folder on the table, his hand resting firmly on top. The meeting began with the usual formalities, the secretary reading minutes, the treasurer droning about budget. But no one was here for that. Everyone was waiting for the showdown. And soon enough, Susan leaned into the microphone, voice dripping with righteous indignation. Tonight, we must address an ongoing issue threatening the safety and harmony of Maplewood Estates. One homeowner has displayed aggressive conduct, harassing board members, violating community guidelines, and even resorting to unlawful retaliation by towing a neighbor's vehicle. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Derek clenched his jaw but stayed silent, letting her speak. She continued, milking every word. As HOA president, it's my duty to protect this community. We cannot tolerate hostility. We cannot tolerate neighbors who think the rules don't apply to them. And we certainly cannot tolerate intimidation. She turned, eyes locking on Derek like daggers. For these reasons, I recommend suspension of privileges and escalating fines until compliance is achieved. The room buzzed louder, voices overlapping, some nodding, some shaking their heads. Derek's pulse pounded. His fingers tightened on his folder. Tasha, sitting beside him, whispered, Now, it's your turn. Derek stood slowly, the room falling into hush. He walked to the front, each step heavy, until he stood only a few feet from Susan. She smirked, arms folded, as if she'd already won. Derek placed his folder on the table, opened it, and spread the papers like cards in a deck. Neighbors, he began, his voice steady, carrying across the room. You've heard her side. Now hear mine. He held up the first violation notice, then the second, then the third, all within 2 weeks, all for petty issues. Meanwhile, I've got video proof that this. He jabbed a finger towards Susan, has repeatedly parked her vehicle in my driveway, against HOA bylaws, against city law. And when I finally had it towed, suddenly I'm the criminal? He held up his phone, screen glowing. A video played. Susan admitting, yeah, it's mine. My husband's reorganizing the garage. I just needed somewhere to put it temporarily. Gasps filled the room. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Susan's smirk faltered. Derek laid the petition on the table next. 27 signatures from homeowners asking for a special meeting. Not about me. About her. About the way she's been abusing her position for years. The board shuffled uneasily. Neighbors whispered. For the first time, Derek saw doubt flicker across Susan's face. But then, just as quickly, her eyes hardened. She leaned into the mic, voice sharp. That video is taken out of context. Those signatures? Probably coerced. And this entire display, this is aggression. This is exactly the hostility I've been warning you about. She turned to the board, chin high. I motion we vote immediately. The room erupted in shouts, voices clashing, neighbors divided. And at the center of it all, Derek and Susan locked eyes. Two storms colliding. The room was a storm. Neighbors shouted over one another. Chairs scraped. Hands shot into the air. The board members glanced nervously at each other, unsure how to wrestle control back. And in the middle of it all, Derek stood steady, folder open, eyes locked on Susan. She sat like a queen under fire, smile tight, voice slicing through the noise. Enough of this chaos. This meeting is about Derek Johnson's conduct. Not me. Not the board. Him. The treasurer tried to calm the crowd. Order, please. But Susan cut in. I call for an immediate vote on sanctions. If we let this behavior stand, this community will fall into disorder. Her allies clapped. A few shouted, yes. Derek lifted his hand, his deep voice booming. Before you vote, I have one last piece of evidence. The room hushed. Eyes turned. Even Susan's smirk twitched. Derek held up his phone, tapping the screen. The speakers crackled, and then Susan's voice filled the room. There's no law against it, is there? And it's not like you were using it right now. The recording played clear and sharp, her tone arrogant, dismissive, dripping with entitlement. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People whispered, and Derek wasn't finished. He swiped to another clip. Susan shouting at him across the driveway, eyes blazing, finger pointed. You really should be more neighborly, Derek. You don't want to start trouble with a hoe over something small, do you? Another round of murmurs. Some neighbors shook their heads. Others exchanged knowing looks. Derek let the silence hang for a moment, then spoke. This isn't about rules. It's about power. About one person abusing her position to bully anyone she doesn't like. Today it's me. Tomorrow it'll be you. He set the phone down and looked around the room. I pay my dues. I keep my property clean. I respect this neighborhood. But respect is a two-way street. And I refuse to let anyone, whole president or not, treat me like I don't belong here. His voice grew firmer, each word striking like a hammer. This is my home, my family's home, and I'm not going anywhere. The room erupted again, but this time the energy shifted. Yes, someone shouted from the back. He's right, another neighbor called. Mrs. Jenkins, standing with her cane, raised her voice. I've lived here 30 years, and I've seen enough of Susan's bullying. I second Derek's petition. It's time we vote on her. A wave of applause broke out. The Carters nodded vigorously. Even neighbors who had been silent began murmuring agreement. Susan's face flushed crimson. She slammed her palm against the table. This is absurd. He's twisting everything. You're all letting emotions cloud your judgment. But the tide was turning, and she felt it. One of the board members, Mr. Alvarez, a quiet man who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. Madam President, the bylaws are clear. If 20% of homeowners petition for a special meeting, it must be honored. And, well, it seems Mr. Johnson has exceeded that threshold. Derek slid the petition forward, signatures neatly stacked. The board secretary counted them, lips moving silently. Finally, she looked up. 27 verified signatures. That's enough. A hush fell. Mr. Alvarez adjusted his glasses. Then the motion stands. Before any sanctions are considered against Mr. Johnson, the board must address the petition, calling into question President Miller's conduct. The room buzzed louder now, neighbors leaning forward, anticipation thick. Susan's smile shattered. She gripped the edge of the table. You can't do this. I am the HOA. Without me, this neighborhood falls apart. A voice from the crowd shouted back. No, Susan, you're the reason it's falling apart. The board huddled briefly, whispers passing between them. Then Mr. Alvarez spoke again, voice firm. We will take a preliminary vote. All in favor of holding a special meeting to review President Miller's actions, raise your hand. Hands shot up across the room. First a few, then a dozen, then nearly the entire crowd. Derek scanned the sea of raised hands. His heart pounded. This was it, the moment. The secretary tallied, then announced, majority in favor. The motion passes. Cheers erupted. Some neighbors clapped. Others shouted in relief. And Susan, once untouchable, sat frozen, face pale, lips trembling. Derek didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He just looked at her, steady, unflinching. This isn't about winning, Susan, he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. It's about respect. Something you've never given anyone who didn't fit your little box. Her eyes burned, but she had no words. Because for the first time, the room wasn't with her. It was against her. The board moved quickly after that, setting a date for the special meeting, promising transparency. The neighbors left buzzing, energy electric, conversations spilling into the parking lot. As Derek gathered his papers, Tasha slipped her hand into his. Her eyes shone with pride. You did it, she whispered. Not yet, Derek said, exhaling. But tonight? Tonight was a turning point. He glanced across the room. Susan still sat at the table, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow, wine glass composure gone. And Derek knew this wasn't over. She would fight tooth and nail to cling to power. But so would he. The parking lot outside the community center buzzed like a festival after the meeting. Clusters of neighbors gathered in little knots, voices rising with excitement, relief, even laughter. For years, Susan's iron grip had weighed heavy on Maplewood Estates. Tonight, it cracked. Derek stepped out into the humid evening, Tasha by his side, his folder tucked under his arm. The cicadas droned in the trees, but for once, he didn't feel the usual heaviness pressing on him. Instead, he felt light. Neighbors waved, some stopping to clap him on the back. You said what we've all been thinking, Mr. Davis told him, his eyes glinting with approval. About time someone stood up to her. The Carters chimed in. Mrs. Jenkins actually hugged him, her cane tapping the pavement. Child, you made me proud tonight. Derek smiled, grateful, but part of him remained cautious. Susan wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. And sure enough, across the lot, he spotted her. Susan stood rigid beside her Lexus, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Two of her bored allies hovered nearby, whispering frantically, but she brushed them off, her gaze fixed on Derek like a predator stalking prey. For a moment, their eyes locked. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, cold, calculated, venomous. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, Derek and Tasha sat on the back porch, the scent of honeysuckle drifting through the humid air. Fireflies blinked across the yard, Maya asleep upstairs. Tasha leaned against him, wine glass in hand. You know, I think the neighborhood finally sees her for who she really is. Yeah, Derek said, his voice low. But people like Susan? They don't just fade away. She'll try something else. I can feel it. Tasha tilted her head, studying him. You're not scared anymore, though. I can see it in you. Derek chuckled softly, sipping his drink. Scared? No tired? Yeah, I just want peace. I just want to mow my lawn, grill on Sundays, raise my daughter, and not have to fight a war every time I pull into my driveway. And you will, Tasha whispered. You already won the hardest part. Her words eased him, but that lingering unease stayed lodged in his chest. The days that followed were different. For the first time since moving in, Derek felt truly welcomed. Neighbors waved from porches. Kids on bikes shouted, "Hi, Mr. Johnson," as they sped past. Even folks who had been distant before stopped by, dropping off baked goods or just offering kind words. It was like the neighborhood had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. But the calm wasn't perfect. Susan's house sat across the street like a fortress, blinds drawn, curtains shut. Her Lexus was gone for days, then reappeared late at night. No more porch chats, no more loud gossip, just silence, until the letters started again. On Wednesday, Derek opened his mailbox and froze. 3 envelopes, all from the HOA. He ripped the first open. Violation notice: grass length exceeds regulation standards. The second, violation notice: garbage can left in view after pickup. The third, violation notice: unauthorized modification to exterior lighting. Derek's jaw clenched. His grass was cut, his garbage can rolled away, his lights unchanged. These were lies. Susan was still pulling strings. That evening, Derek stood in the driveway, holding the letters, when Mr. Davis strolled over. Got one too, Davis said, waving his own envelope. Apparently my mailbox paint is fading. It ain't. Same mailbox I've had for 15 years. The Carters came out next, shaking their heads. Us too. Fence too high. She's not giving up, Derek. She's lashing out. Derek nodded slowly, the anger burning hot in his chest. She's trying to punish anyone who stood with me. Mrs. Jenkins hobbled out onto her porch, voice sharp as a whip. Let her try. Folks are talking, Derek. The tides turned. Nobody's scared of her anymore. Still, the harassment wore on him. Every day, another bogus notice. Every morning, another envelope taped to his door. The stress gnawed at his sleep, his temper. Tasha noticed it too. You can't let her drag you down again, she urged one night. You already beat her in front of everyone. Don't let these games undo that. I know, Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. But she's desperate. And desperate people, they get dangerous. His fears weren't unfounded. Friday evening, Derek pulled into the driveway just as flashing lights filled the street. 2 police cruisers sat outside Susan's house. Officers moved in and out, notebooks in hand. Neighbors gathered on lawns, whispering, watching. Derek's stomach dropped. Tasha stepped out onto the porch as he got out of the car. What's going on? I don't know, Derek muttered, scanning the scene. Then one of the officers crossed the street, straight toward him. Mr. Johnson? The cop asked, voice neutral but firm. Yeah, Derek replied cautiously. Mind if we ask you a few questions? There's been an allegation made against you. Derek's pulse spiked. What kind of allegation? The officer glanced at his notebook. Harassment, intimidation, possible property damage. The complaint was filed by your neighbor, Susan Miller. Gasps rippled through the crowd of watching neighbors. Tasha's hand flew to her mouth. Derek stood frozen, the weight of Susan's last desperate card crashing over him. She wasn't done. She was escalating. The red and blue lights washed across Derek's house like an accusation. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, watching. Some whispered, others just stared, their faces tense. For years, people had feared Susan's wrath. But now they were witnessing her final, desperate strike. The officer held his notepad steady. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Miller has accused you of damaging her property and making threats. Derek's chest tightened. He forced himself to keep calm, to breathe. That's a lie. he said firmly, and I've got proof. Tasha hurried down the steps, her voice sharp with anger. He hasn't touched her property. The only harassment here has been her toward us. The officer raised a hand. Ma'am, we're just gathering information. If you have evidence, we'll take it. Derek's mind raced. The videos, the recordings, the petition. He had everything he needed. But would it be enough against Susan's connections and manipulations? Susan strutted across the street then, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. I've feared for my safety ever since Derek here decided to make me his personal enemy. I've got scratches on my car, threatening notes left on my door. That's not true. Derek cut in, fury flaring. The crowd murmured, some rolling their eyes, others shaking their heads. Mrs. Jenkins leaned on her cane, calling out from her porch. She's lying. That man hasn't bothered her one bit. It's the other way around. The Carters stepped forward too. Check the security footage on our cameras, Mr. Carter said. You'll see Derek hasn't been anywhere near her property. And I've got video, Mr. Davis added, raising his phone. Caught her putting those so-called notes on her own door last night. The officers exchanged looks. One scribbled quickly in his notebook. Susan froze. Her eyes darted around, realizing the crowd wasn't backing her anymore. Why, you don't understand, she stammered. These people, they're all against me because Derek's been stirring them up. He's dangerous. But the words sounded hollow, desperate. Derek pulled out his phone, scrolling swiftly. Officers, here's a recording from last week. You'll hear her admitting the Lexus was hers, parked in my driveway, and another where she threatened me if I didn't back off. He pressed play. Susan's voice spilled out once again, sharp, entitled, unmistakable. The crowd fell silent except for the crisp audio. You don't want to start trouble with the hoe over something small, do you? One of the officers exhaled slowly. All right. We've got more than enough to document both sides. He looked at Derek. For now, sir, you're free to go about your evening. Ms. Miller, we'll need to follow up with you about these conflicting statements. The cruisers pulled away minutes later, leaving Susan standing alone in her driveway. The neighbors didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stared. And that was worse. Their silence was condemnation enough. Susan turned on her heel and stormed inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Derek stood still, his heart still hammering. But this time it wasn't fear, it was relief. The truth had spoken louder than her lies. Tasha squeezed his arm. It's over. It has to be. Derek shook his head. Not yet, but it's coming. The following week, the special HOA meeting convened. This time, the turnout was larger than ever. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. The air buzzed with anticipation, the weight of years of pent-up frustration pressing down on the room. Susan entered late, shoulders stiff, face pale but defiant. She still wore her blazer, still tried to carry herself like she was untouchable. But the murmurs, the pointed stares, told a different story. The board took their seats, papers stacked, expressions grave. Mr. Alvarez cleared his throat. Tonight's agenda concerns serious allegations against HOA President Susan Miller, including abuse of authority, harassment, and falsified violation notices. We will hear statements, then vote on her removal. Gasps rippled. Susan shot to her feet. This is outrageous. I have served this community for 10 years. 10 years. And this is how I'm repaid? Voices rose from the crowd. 10 years of bullying, of targeting people you didn't like. You almost ran Derek out of here. Derek sat silently, letting the tide speak for him. One by one, neighbors stood and gave testimony. Mr. Davis described years of unfair fines. The Carters shared how Susan had threatened their guests for parking on the street. Mrs. Jenkins spoke of how she lived in fear of speaking up until now. And then Derek rose, his voice calm but steady. All I wanted was peace, a home where my daughter could feel safe. But instead, I was treated like I didn't belong. Not because I broke rules, But because I stood up to someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her, he scanned the room, meeting eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. This isn't just about me. It's about what kind of neighborhood we want to live in. One ruled by fear, or one built on respect. The applause was immediate, thunderous. When it was Susan's turn, she stumbled. Her words, once sharp and commanding, came out brittle and weak. They're lying. They've been manipulated. I've only ever wanted what's best for Maplewood, but no one believed her anymore. The board called for a vote. All in favor of removing Susan Miller as HOA president? Hands rose. Fast. Firm. Nearly unanimous. The secretary tallied, then announced. Motion passes. Effective immediately. The room erupted. Applause. Shouts of joy. Neighbors hugging. Years of tension melting in an instant. Susan stood frozen, her face drained of color. Then, without a word, she grabbed her bag and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Derek sat back, Tasha gripping his hand. Relief surged through him like a tide finally receding. It was over. Susan's reign was done. But as he looked around the cheering room, he realized something bigger had happened. This wasn't just his victory. It was the neighborhood's. They had taken back their voice. The next morning, Derek woke to silence. No envelopes taped to the door, no angry emails from the HOA, no feeling of dread twisting in his stomach as he reached for the mailbox. Just birdsong in the trees, the sun spilling over the rooftops, and the simple peace of knowing he didn't have to fight anyone just to exist in his own home. He brewed coffee and sat on the porch, the steam rising into the cool morning air. For the first time since moving to Maplewood,